Your cloud provider is here as a foundation. Your product sits on top of it, and you still need to maybe layer in security before you're actually connected to the actual internet. Hey everybody, welcome back to CISO Life. I'm Brian Hogley, your host, brought to you by SideChannel. You can follow me anywhere down around social media land, hashtag CISO Life. Today, excited as I am always with this show, not just a chance to talk to all of you, but today I get to bring on one of my favorite people in the world, good friend of mine, Nick Hnatiw. He's joined me on the journey of building out SideChannel and now in real CISO, where he is our Chief Technical Officer. Nick, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks so much. It's great to be here. This is, I feel like a long time in the coming.
What did you see out of your past experiences and your work that maybe played into a factor this past year that, organizations were kind of gravitating towards as far as work that they need to do around cybersecurity?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've heard a few people kind of echo the same sort of sentiment. I feel like everybody was sort of racing to figure out how to do remote access,
Mm-hmm.
both from a technological perspective, right? So let's separate technology and security for 1 second. Just being able to implement that and making sure that everybody can access all the company features that they need, and then couple that with like, okay, now we know how to do that. Like, how do we do that securely? Which is sometimes the overlooked question, unfortunately. But that was really kind of where I saw a lot of people move.
What are you seeing that's working and what are you seeing that's not working when it comes to organizations looking at themselves to figure out what do I do next that's going to be meaningful?
Yeah, sure. So that's a great question, and I think it's sort of broken up in a couple of pieces here, right? So there's a bunch of assessment tools out there, right, that you can do, and you can take an assessment. But really, I think the places where people need like the big gap in the gap analysis space, I guess, is like that road to remediation, right? What's one thing to understand sort of your gaps and understand your risks, but then it's you still get the question of like, okay, now what? Really tying those gaps to actual solutions or products or services that will fill those gaps. Like that's I think like the key piece that one where obviously we're trying to build inside of real CISO, but also just like a big gap that I see inside of the assessment space generally.
What's the biggest, I mean, I've got my opinions, as I'm sure everyone knows, but like what's the biggest thing that people are failing on when they're doing that assessment? Is it that they don't even have the right tool? Is it, that they're just gravitating towards Excel and then they're realizing once they get into it, it doesn't scale? Like what's the thing that you're seeing that it's just not working when people are trying to do that assessment to get to that so what point, right? Everyone wants to get to the, hey, what do I do? But there's that time before knowing that where you are assessing your organization. What are the failures there that you've
Yeah.
seen?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, I'll break this up into sort of two separate pools of people. I think there's the people out there who just like don't even know where to start.
Right.
And looking at a spreadsheet of controls is just like alien cryptography to them, right? They are just like, I don't know what to do with this. I don't know what these numbers and what these letters mean. And so there's that gap. Right, where people just don't even understand the complexities of the frameworks and how to apply them to their business. Then there's sort of the more advanced people who I think, and you kind of said this, with Excel spreadsheets. I think there's like the Excel sort of fatigue, right? Nobody wants to sit in Excel for 10 hours a day, pushing around, different standards and different controls to figure out how and what they mean. So I think those are like the two sort of different perspectives from the different sides of the experience pool that I see.
So Nick, you spent time inside of the Department of Defense, supporting that federal government agency and working there both as a contractor and as a government civilian. With what you're seeing come out of the executive order, the CMMC, all the other initiatives over the last 2 years, and just the way of kind of action and inaction having an impact on the defense industrial base or the DIB. From your experience, having been on both sides of the contracting world and working with the government, what are you seeing being like the real impacts to the defense industrial base that they got to take advantage of doing something about in the next year?
I mean, I don't know. So looking at this from the government standpoint, right? The advantages are high, right? There's going to be a lot of controls, a lot of accountability pushed down onto people who hold data, right? So that's like, I guess, the big advantage from the government perspective. But what I don't think is sort of really being looked at enough is what is the impact on the actual DOB or DIB going to be trying to implement these things, right? So CMMC is, you know, arguably more complicated than 171, which was already fairly complicated to begin with, right? So if
Right.
you look at CSF as sort of being, or CIS maybe even the top 20 being like the entry point into sort of security controls, it's sort of the lowest bar. I mean, it's not even that low of a bar, but sort of the bar to understanding, barrier to entry for understanding. And now you apply this, 171 language and then CMC on top of that now. It's just going to make it really hard for these manufacturers and whatever all the power providers or whomever else is going to have to be, whoever else is going to fall underneath the CMMC directive. Like, you're just going to see a lot of people either fail to achieve optimal status or the level that they need to achieve, or you're going to see people leave the DIB in general and just go after a different market and stop going after the defense side because it's going to push costs too high. So there's this idea inside of the CMMC, or at least inside of some of the memos and stuff that have come out around it, that like you're going to be able to sort of tie these costs into your contract and really sort of recoup that cost. But I don't know if that's like been adequately looked at, right? There's going to be, I think, a lot of people that sort of fall through those cracks who do implementations but can't quite afford it, and then aren't seeing that recoup through the contract vehicle like it's anticipated.
Right. So the recently former kind of lead for that, Katie Arrington, within the DoD, was kind of known for saying how cheap this was going to be for the defense industrial base to actually apply, how costs could be pushed up, right? But the reality is that a lot of organizations hadn't even met 800-171 controls. So to go ahead now and meet CMMC controls, it's almost an entirely net new cost for organizations. We're seeing it with clients under SideChannel. And then the cost that goes and pushed up into the reimbursement, that's still yet to be even seen. The cost that they've stated, that because they're making that assumption based on some very, very, I think, low ball numbers around what the costs are for an organization to meet CMMC. So IPC put out a phenomenal report penned by Leslie Weinstein, whom we know, and I'll link down below, who's with CMMC Consulting. Now she's with High Trust. But she put together a whole analysis and report on what the cost will actually be for even meeting the SPRS scoring or the 800-171 self-assessment, which is far cry from what CMMC is even looking for. The government was saying it would take roughly less than $500. I think it was even significantly less than that for an organization to meet that self-assessment scoring. And her calculations based on the number of controls, the number of domains, the amount of work that needs to go into it, the level of expertise you actually need to understand those questions to accurately self-assess yourself, it was closer to $6,000. I think it was around $5,500 was the cost for an organization to go through and actually do that self-assessment. Does that delta and gap between what the government sees or was positioning as the cost and what the reality of the industry living in, does that tell us anything about maybe how this is going to go or what the actual impacts could be?
From my opinion, absolutely, right? Like it's already from the get-go, from the assessment side of it, they're completely estimating the value that it's going to require to get a self-assessment done. $500, like that's ludicrous, right? Like that's a couple hours of somebody's time. And I just don't think that you're going to get to a whole gap analysis of your organization in a couple of hours. Maybe if you're a small shop and you know your entire network, like sure, maybe like then you can do it. But for the 10 million, the $20 million revenue company out there with 100 people who's got like one or two IT staff, like that's going to take them a lot longer to do that for sure.
And that's without any other type of tooling or assistance.
Yeah.
That's purely Excel spreadsheet and, man or woman hours to just go answer, am I doing this or not?
Exactly. And then also having the understanding of how to answer those assessments, right? So you're looking at controls. You have to determine on your own now and have the expertise to be able to answer, am I protected? Is my remote access protected? Like, you have to understand now all of the nuances that are in that sort of, fairly vague and open control. Like, there's a lot of things that you have to consider. There's a lot of, if you're using Gmail, are all of the Gmail accesses controlled properly? If you have a VPN, are all the VPN controls accessed properly, right? So there's all these nuances that I don't think are being taken into account, which is sort of driving down what that estimate is coming from the government. But in reality, much to your point, that was a great article too that IPC put out, that really details the $5,000 to $6,000 sort of mark on what it's going to cost in order to actually get just assessment done, right? To get to your gap analysis. Like, that's where I think that number seems more in line with reality to me, than certainly that $500, which, and back to your question, like, that just makes me think now they're going to start undervaluing the rest of it, right? The implementation costs are going to be undervalued, and how are people going to sort of meet those challenges, both from a technical implementation standpoint as well as a cost standpoint? So how do you integrate those technologies into your current network, as well as afford them, right? So there's sort of like a lot of nuance there, and a lot more that's going to have to be done in order to get compliant.
Yeah, I think the first step is not underestimating the costs, right, that are going to be, where am I, determining that. And then obviously not underestimating the cost to properly budget for the remediation of any gaps that are identified. I mean, that seems to be just pretty straightforward. And honestly, as a CISO and former CISO, like, that's one of my biggest fears is, I've got to ask for the right budget to be able to address the gaps, but I need to make sure that my assessment is proper so I can then identify what the gaps are to then be able to figure out what the right budget is. The worst thing that can happen is I do a poor assessment, I under budget what I have to do, I get into the season, and now I get halfway through a budget year going, oh, I don't have the resources to actually be able to address what my gaps are. And now either I got to go beg for new money, find new money, or I just have to accept the risk and go to next year. And I don't think the defense industrial base is in a position to be able to go do that for any elongated amount of time. So thanks for your input on that. It's great to hear. You have a great view, having been inside and outside the government, of being able to see what this could do and impact. I was only a contractor supporting the government, so I didn't have that full visibility. So I appreciate your insight on this. This is phenomenal.
Yeah,
Nick,
sure.
last question on kind of just that. Like, what's small defense contracting firms to maintain that compliance, right? So say we can do the correct self-assessment, whether it's using spreadsheet or an automated tool, and I'll just pitch RC for real CISO for a second. If you can get through an assessment, you're there, you feel confident in what you have, you identified what your gaps are. What does it look like? What are the best things that a small defense contractor can do to maintain that compliance? Like, what are the available tools or services that they should be reaching out to and making sure? Or is it just like, hey, I said it, I can forget it, and I'm going to be good? What's some advice around just maintaining compliance?
Yeah, I mean, I think some controls you're going to be able to just sort of set it and forget it, as the famous infomercial like guided my youth. You'll be able to sort of knock out your sort of your SSSP. You can claim you have a CISO, whoever that might be, right? Those are going to be some things that you're not going to have to kind of keep track of. But as the last thing you want to do is get caught in an audit, and now you're not compliant, and now you have like 60 days, right, to get compliance, or whatever that time limit is that the auditor is going to provide you before you have to regain your compliance, before you're in default, or you're in breach of whatever contract from the prime status, or you have to pull people off a contract, which would probably be the worst case scenario. So depending on how strict those rules are is really going to determine like how aggressive you need to be to make sure that you're maintaining those controls. Those sort of harder to maintain controls, the access level controls, like who's accessing what, and how those role based access control lists, like how are you really managing those things? And the best advice, and to make this the easiest, is to really try to push as much SaaS technology as you can, right? Because you're at least offloading some of that IT burden from yourself. So now you don't have to take care of a majority of those things. You have to now just make sure that the controls are being met inside of that SaaS platform. So one, hopefully that SaaS platform is compliant to all of these controls that you're using. That's like the big question, or that you need to get answered. And then two, it has the ability for you to um, implement those controls that need to be implemented in them. And then the maintenance of that should be relatively easy depending on sort of where you go, right? So if you have sort of not to sort of name drop or company drop any sort of things, but predominantly a large part of the world is on AWS. It has a lot of abilities in it to be able to meet these controls specifically, no matter what your sort of product or service is, depending if that's where you're delivering from. Now, doing all of that stuff on your own, in your own either private cloud or data center or whatever, is going to be vastly more expensive than doing it inside of AWS. So those are the ways that you can kind of save yourself some heartache and some pain, but it's not going to be sort of you're never going to be in a position where you can set all of the controls and just be like, cool, I'm done. Maybe at like a CMC level 1 might be able to do some of that, more of that than the level 3s, or certainly the level 5s. But once you get to sort of that level 3 status where you're handling CUI and you need to have specific controls built around it, like there's going to be a handful of controls that you're just going to have to maintain continuously.
Yeah. So kind of coming back onto, you mentioned pushing things to SaaS, right? So offloading infrastructure support requirements, possibly even the resources that you would have underneath you to maintain that, right? So there's some definite advantages there. When you're looking at, kind of the work that happens within cloud, and when people move and start really using cloud, and the thinking around security and inheritance, of the cloud, do you feel like a lot of people are making a mistake using cloud, just going, oh, AWS is doing everything for me as far as cloud? Like, I'm good. Like, I have everything now in GCP, or I have everything in Azure. Like, I don't have to, be responsible for this security component anymore. What are you seeing kind of around that space?
Yeah, no, I'm laughing because that's exactly what people say and think, and that's exactly not true, right? So the beauty of AWS and other cloud providers is that you can offload a bunch of IT resources, right? You no longer need 10 IT people to be maintaining servers, and if hardware goes down, to replace those systems so that you have zero downtime, or as close to zero downtime as you possibly can. AWS, GCP, name your cloud provider, that's where they come in, right? That's what they're really helping with. Now, AWS, probably more so than any of the other cloud providers, has built up a lot of technology around the cloud in order to help you get more secure. But that doesn't mean that just because you are in AWS or in GCP, you are more secure, right? You still have the same challenges of remote access, penetration attempts that can happen if you're not patched, if you don't have the right security controls in place. People can still get into your network. That's the big misnomer, right? So can they break into AWS's network? Yeah, probably not. That's probably locked down pretty well. But if you're in your cloud instance inside of there, yeah, that's not locked down really well. That's not AWS security teams going in there and making sure it's all set up the way that it needs to be in order to maintain a solid security posture. That's still on you to do. And to know which AWS services in the grand menagerie of AWS services that exist, you have to know which ones to implement where and when to be able to get those security controls to be put in place. So you're not sort of out of the woods. You have, depending on which cloud provider you have more capabilities at your disposal, sort of out of the box, I'll say. You can do all of that same stuff in sort of a GCP or a DigitalOcean. It's a little bit more manual because they don't have the same tooling built into the AWS ecosystem, like AWS has in its ecosystem.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I want to just kind of articulate one idea. Like, I know most people kind of look at their cloud provider and then see their platform underneath it, and I think this visual gives people the wrong misconception. The reality is that what you should be doing is more of your cloud provider is here as a foundation, your product sits on top of it, and you still need to maybe layer in security before you're actually connected to the actual internet. So
That's exactly right.
This type of a view is much more the reality, right? If you've got your SaaS or platform, right, sitting there, this is how we should be looking at securing it. It's like, what is available from here that I can use? Not, oh, I sit inside of the cloud and therefore I get everything and I'm secure. So
you often hear the people say, well, AWS is SOC 2 compliant, so therefore I'm SOC 2 compliant. And
right.
that's just not how that works. That's just not how that works. So you got to go through your own sort of steps to compliance, and which requires all of the security controls that you need to sort of implement, and policy pieces that SOC 2 requires, as well as other frameworks. Yeah.
Right. Start and think about inheritance, everyone. You're inheriting what you're using. You don't get it all. You inherit some things. You still have to do stuff. Well, Nick, I want to thank you for your time. Actually, before we go, I got to ask, what's the shirt? What's the selection of the shirt for today?
Yeah, so the museum nerd is Chicago museums are one, awesome. And two, there's just I don't know, my wife found a shirt at a museum she went to, and she knew I'd love it, which I do. I am a big fan of the Art Institute of Chicago. If you've never been, you should definitely go. The others are really good too, but Art Institute sort of got a special place in my heart. But yeah, no, I just love the museums, man. Take me to a museum, I'm awesome. A happy person.
Well, Nick, I want to thank you for your time today and coming on. My guest today, Nick Hnatiw, currently the Chief Technical Officer for Real CISO and for SideChannel, and someone that I consider a close friend. Nick, thanks again for coming on. Any parting words?
Just stay secure. That's the mantra. Stay safe in this crazy world too. Those are the big ones. Brian, again, thank you again.
Oh yeah, man, dude. No worries. Anytime. Well, so spring's upon us, and hopefully everyone's getting outside and enjoying some good weather. I am Brian Hoagley. Thank you so much again for watching CISO Life. You can find me around social media land down below on Twitter or LinkedIn, anywhere using hashtag CISO Life, and of course, our newly relaunched SideChannel.com. Go check it out. Comment down below if there's anything that you want us to highlight or talk about next. Pretty sure I'm going to be able to get Nick back on next time. I will link the IPC article report down below in the comments, and we will talk to you next time. Thanks for watching. Be safe, everyone.